Welcome to the Code of Life. I'm Randy Neal. What do you do to stay sane and healthy, especially during these COVID times? Well, studies show a lot of us go outside. We turn to nature. We go for a walk in our neighborhood. We go for a hike in the forest. We go for a paddleboard on the lake or in the ocean. Well, healthy forests support a healthy environment. We know that they purify the air and water, for example. But more and more studies are also showing that human health outcomes are directly correlated with the area covered by forests. But increasingly, and not just because it's 2020, our forests are facing unprecedented threats from invasive species and pathogens that can cause irreversible damage. The process of invasion can be written in 4 chapters: transport, introduction, establishment, and spread. Once again, science and scientists are coming to the rescue, quietly studying these threats, coming up with devices to help uncover and stop them before they can establish and spread. Dr. Richard Hamlin, a UBC professor, is a forest pathologist with an interest in using genetic and genomic approaches to better understand forest disease epidemics, using genomics to design better detection and monitoring methods. And he's created a fast, accurate, portable DNA testing approach that can perform testing anywhere to accurately detect invasive pests and pathogens. And he's a great writer because I stole much of what I just said from a paper he co-wrote called Genomic Biosurveillance of Forest Invasive Alien Enemies, a story written in code, which is also a great title. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Hamlin.
Nice to meet you.
So let's first talk about, you may seem familiar to a lot of people, and lately, I mean, it's not as if we have enough to worry about right now, but we also have these kind of lazy, beautiful white moths floating around, inundating the air and our trees. And it's not just one moth, but 2. What are they and what's happening?
So this is actually a perfectly natural outbreak of a native moth, actually, the Hemlock Loopers. There's 2 species, the Western Hemlock Looper and the Phantom Hemlock Looper. And these moths are part of the natural ecosystems. And every about 10 to 20 years, there's an outbreak. And that's because, well, all the conditions are right. You have, dry seasons, you have warm seasons, and when a couple of those seasons accumulate, then you get the populations explode. And this is what we're seeing now. And that happens every maybe 10 to 20 years. And in a natural cycle, they will last, anywhere between 1 to 3 or 4 years. And here we are in our probably 2nd or 3rd year. So we kind of waiting to see if next year these populations will crash, which is what would happen in a natural cycle, or whether they will keep increasing, in which case, well, maybe something odd is happening.
And so, as you suggest, it's funny that we haven't really noticed them before if this is their 3rd year. But then if they do disappear next year, then everything points to a natural cyclic cycle that they take part in. But if they continue to stay and hurt the trees, then it becomes another cause, possibly climate change.
Yeah, exactly. And the jury is out on that one. We can't say it is or it is not. If it could just be part of the natural cycle. But yeah, if the populations keep growing and we don't see any kind of a slowdown on the outbreak, then we would be certainly looking for, the kind of pattern we saw on the mountain pine beetle, where initially we thought, okay, this is just a natural outbreak. It happens every, so many decades. And then it went off the chart, and so this is one we're going to be on the lookout for the next few years to make sure that this particular Hemlock Looper outbreak is not one of those freak events.
So they're not a foreign invasive species, but you really spend a lot of time studying and trying to look for foreign invasive species What is it that got you into this? Why were you so attracted to that?
Well, because as you know, the forest ecosystems have their sort of own balance, internal balance, and like pre-human colonization of North America and much of the world, the forests still were attacked by insects and diseases, and that's just part of the natural cycle. What happens is that once we started exploiting the forest, logging, and then when we started, moving things around, tree species, we started moving insects and pathogens, these invasive species that in some cases they have really changed the ecosystems. And there's many examples of invasive species. Let's just think of Dutch elm disease, the chestnut blight, white pine blisterus, maybe less known, but just one of the deadliest pine diseases on the planet we have in BC. Emerald ash borer. These are all invasive species. They're not native. They were introduced accidentally, and they wreak havoc on the forest ecosystems. In some cases, virtually eliminating some of those native tree species that we have.
So going back to the 4 chapters of invasion, transport, the invasive species gets here somehow. Introduction, it gets introduced somehow. It establishes, and then it spreads. You have helped create this portable DNA handheld testing device. Where does that come in, and how is this really a game changer when we're talking about invasive species and pathogens?
So these 4 chapters of invasion, the transport is really where we can have the biggest impact, because that's about preventing the new future invasive species from, establishing on our shores. And in order to do that, you need rapid and accurate identification. And in some of those invasive species, or potential invasive species, like the gypsy moth, for example, the way that they travel around the world is they basically hitch a ride on ships or cargo. Whenever I ride my bike around Stanley Park on the seawall, I see all those ships in English Bay, and those ships, if they came from Asia, well, that's where the Asian gypsy moth is from. And the female gypsy moth might very well have laid their eggs on a ship. And these eggs will just travel across the Pacific and then end up in the port of Vancouver. And every year, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency that does all the inspection and the surveys finds some eggs on some of the ships. So we know that this potential invasive species is really knocking at the door. So we know that there's some fines, and then we need to do a rapid identification to determine do we have an Asian gypsy moth, especially if we find only eggs on ships, or do we have the more damaging and potentially more problematic Asian gypsy moth, or do we have the European gypsy moth, which is also undesirable, but it's already been established in Eastern North America? And that's just for the ships. We also import plants. Whenever you go to a garden center, you see all those nice, beautiful green plants, rhododendrons and camellias, and people buy them and plant them in their garden. A lot of these plants are grown elsewhere, and they're imported into Canada. And some pathogens will infect plants and remain asymptomatic. So you will look at the plant. It looks completely green, but it can be a carrier of a pathogen. And a lot of the pathogens, exotic pathogens, enter through such means.
So tell us about the handheld device. How does that work? How can this potentially, as I said earlier, be a game changer for detecting and finding invasive species and pathogens?
So in the last couple of decades, we've gotten really good at developing DNA tests to identify these potential invasive species directly from environmental samples or survey samples. So you can take eggs of gypsy moth and then extract the DNA. And we have developed DNA tests that can tell the Asian from the European gypsy moth, and we can do the same thing with a bunch of pathogens. We've developed hundreds of DNA tests that can identify some of the most unwanted potential forest enemies and invasive species. So we've gotten really good at that. The problem is that needs to be done in a lab. And a lot of the sampling that we do in forestry, we do away from a lab, and sometimes hundreds of kilometers away from a lab. So our idea was to say, well, can we not take the lab with us to the field? And then we decided, okay, well, let's take a portable device to do a test called PCR, same test that's used in COVID, and then sort of miniaturize all the kits and the reagents and the instruments so that we can actually put everything in a pack sack, take it with us in the field so that we can do our DNA testing straight in the field and get within 2 hours a result of whether or not we have potential invasive species on site. So basically real time, rapid and accurate identification.
And this, when you think about how it can be used and how it will be used in the next 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, how will this change the way that we're able to, with those 4 chapters of invasive species, from transport, introduction, establishment, and spread, how quickly can we shut them down and prevent them from ever getting here in the first place?
Well, so the shutting down it's hard, right? Because globalization is responsible for this, and globalization is not going to stop. It's not going to slow down, although it did during COVID. So it'd be interesting to see how much it slowed down during COVID. But certainly, globalization is here to stay. These ships will keep, crossing the ocean. But what we think is that we just need more real-time data of what is where, and we need to sort of fill the map with the different species that and where they are and whether they pose a threat to our forest. So, about 2 weeks ago, we took some of the BC Ministry of Forest foresters with us to the field, and we put the instrument in their hands because we wanted to know. I mean, we are scientists, and we work in a lab. So, but we figured, let's just take some of those foresters and trade their axe for a portable, PCR assay kit, and see how they like it and how they perform. And they loved it. I mean, they actually, one of their quote was like, "I want every forest technician in BC to have one of those," so that then in real time you could have in all the different regions of BC, the forest technicians would get results in real time and then upload it in the cloud so that you could have maps in real time of what is where.
That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting, and it's just the beginning of it. I really think that this is just like we're just getting started, because eventually where we want to go is to have much more informative type of testing, DNA testing in the field. This is really where we want to go next. But first things first. Now we have this, qPCR that technicians and foresters and even we're working with forest companies that are also interested for their inventories, and so that they can sort of become now they kind of understand what genomics can do for them. right? And certainly in a forestry sector and in environment, that's the biggest hurdle to the conversations. Like they kind of heard about genomics, but they don't see the connection with genomics and forestry. But now they see it. They see that it can be used to actually answer some of their needs. And so that's, I think that's, it's sort of at the point of entry, but it's really just the beginning.
And it's an exciting made in BC kind of technology that you're sharing with the world. I mean, you say foresters in BC want this. I'm sure the rest of the world would love it just as much.
Yeah, so the instrument itself is developed in the U.S. actually, but all the kits itself, that way we sort of repurpose the instrument to target forest invasive species. That's definitely Canada made.
A last question. We're not quite through 2020, Dr. Hamlin. Please tell us we don't have to worry about any more invasive species or pandemics or pathogens heading our way.
Well, that's what we hope, but there's always some surprises. So, when when you think you have things under control, there's something pops up. But we had a couple of scares this year, and we were able to sort of nip things in the bud. Like I said, the gypsy moth, we've been able to contain it. But now, just in the last couple of weeks, the Dutch elm disease has been moving west. As we know, it was in Quebec, Ontario in the east. And then it had moved to Saskatchewan, and then for the first time, now it's found in Alberta. So it's really kind of making its way towards us. So the fight against invasive species is definitely not over yet.
Well, Dr. Hamlin, we thank you so much for the work that you do, and thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. My pleasure.